It's unsettling what you can find buried in the comment sections of videos. Sometimes you stumble across opinions that are truly disturbing. I recently saw someone casually suggesting they would kill any large snake they came across, anything over 4 feet long. It makes you wonder what else is lurking beneath the surface. Today, I want to talk about some of the most terrifying animal attacks ever recorded. We'll be going back to July 21st, 2016, to a palm tree farm near Palangkaraya in Indonesia. The morning began quietly, the air thick with humidity after the previous night's rain, but by evening, something truly terrible would happen. Reggie Peters, a 32-year-old farm advisor from Britain, was working to improve the water systems for growing palm trees. He was known as a quiet man, diligent in his work. He had a habit of wandering the farm alone, jotting down observations in a small notebook. He'd been in Indonesia for 4 months, captivated by the local wildlife, constantly photographing insects, birds, and other creatures. The workers noticed he never shooed away snakes or lizards, but instead knelt to observe them closely. On that particular day, Reggie set out to check the water ditches, vital for preventing floods during the approaching rainy season. He carried his notebook, measuring tape, and phone to record his notes. Around noon, 2 workers, Amir and Luthi, spotted Reggie near a muddy ditch, kneeling and writing. They joked about the large snakes rumoured to inhabit the water channels. Reggie laughed, saying he'd love to see one up close. The workers later recalled he seemed unconcerned by their warnings, dismissing them as old wives' tales. The palm farm was vast, stretching for miles, with rows of palm trees divided by narrow water channels. The ground was soft and muddy from the recent rain, making some areas quite slippery. Dragonflies flitted over the water, while mosquitoes filled the air. The only sounds were the distant buzz of chainsaws and the low croaking of frogs from the ditches. The heat hung heavy, creating a sense of stillness. This area is home to reticulated pythons, among the largest snakes on Earth. They can exceed 20 feet in length and weigh over 200 pounds. These snakes are ambush predators, lying in wait near water for animals like pigs or dogs. Occasionally, they even attack humans. While such incidents are rare in this part of Indonesia, the snakes have been moving closer to human activity as their natural habitats are destroyed. Locals knew to avoid these snakes, and some carried long knives for protection when working near water. By late afternoon, Reggie hadn't returned to camp. Amir grew concerned and walked toward the area where he had last seen Reggie. The farm was almost silent, save for the incessant buzzing of insects. Then, Amir saw something that froze him in fear. One of Reggie's boots was stuck in the mud near the water channel. A few feet away, an enormous python lay coiled. The snake's midsection was grotesquely swollen, as if it had consumed a very large animal. Amir stood motionless, then began shouting for Luffy and the other workers. Within minutes, 5 men were watching the snake as it slowly moved toward the bushes. The swollen midsections dragged heavily on the ground, leaving a deep track in the mud. The workers grabbed sticks and long poles, attempting to poke at the snake from a safe distance. The python hissed loudly and opened its mouth wide, revealing its curved teeth. It coiled up defensively. The snake was massive, around 15 feet long. None of the workers dared to approach it. The farm supervisor arrived and immediately contacted the local police. As they waited, the men kept a close watch on the snake. At one point, the swollen belly seemed to shift slightly, as if something inside was moving. There's something profoundly disturbing about the moment when the natural world and human tragedy collide. I remember reading about a python, a massive snake found with a strange bulge in its belly. It wasn't an animal it had eaten, but the body of a man named Reggie, a worker on a farm. The image of his clothes torn and soaked, curled up inside the snake, has stayed with me. The horror these workers must have felt. It's almost unimaginable. They'd noticed this unnatural shape on the snake. Something far too large to be a typical animal. They watched through the night, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Then the police came, and the decision was made to kill the snake. It took a long time, many blows with knives and poles, before it finally stopped moving. The cutting open of the snake was described as slow and disturbing. Mud and fluid mixed together as the knife went through its scales. And then there was Reggie. His notebook and phone were found nearby, damaged, covered in mud. His body was eventually taken back to Britain. Afterward, the farm management put up new warning signs, telling workers not to travel alone near the water channels. Then I came across another story, equally unsettling. It was March 15th, 2014, in Ranthambore National Park in Rajasthan, India. The air was cool after a hot day, and 2 travellers were asleep in their tent, unaware that a snake had quietly slithered inside. I've often thought about how easily a perfect moment can shatter. A warm day, a simple task, and then everything changes. In the case of Lara, the German backpacker, her parents were contacted through the Australian Embassy after the tragedy. Following local customs, they requested that her body be cremated. The camp, understandably shaken, chose to continue operations. But they took a crucial step, hiring a local snake expert. Weekly talks were instituted for new guests, teaching them how to properly check their tents and the importance of keeping lights on at night to deter snakes. Lara, after returning to Germany, channeled her grief into a detailed account on a travel website. Her story served as a stark warning to fellow backpackers, urging them to meticulously inspect their tents, bedding and shoes when venturing into snake-prone areas. This post, quietly shared for years, became a somber reminder to those who romanticized sleeping close to nature without fully grasping the inherent dangers. This incident, as tragic as it was, underscores the absolute necessity for travellers to take safety precautions seriously, especially when immersing themselves in wilderness areas. Even experienced and cautious individuals like Claire can encounter unforeseen dangers when humans and wild animals share the same space. This tragedy serves as a constant reminder that proper preparation and awareness can be life-saving when travelling in remote natural areas. Now let me tell you about Jorge Cruz. It was September 9th, 2015, in a small lime orchard just outside a rural town near Veracruz, Mexico. Jorge, 42, had spent his entire life working in that orchard. Every day, before sunrise, he would rise to check the water systems, prune tree branches, and teach his eldest son how to discern healthy fruit from diseased ones. In the village, Jorge was known as a reliable man, the kind of neighbour who would mend broken carts or lend tools without expecting anything in return. He had an old habit from his childhood, working barefoot. He believed it helped him feel the earth beneath him and move more quickly when climbing the lower branches of the trees. The afternoon was intensely hot, the air thick and heavy. The sun beat down on the leaves with such force that everything seemed still. This orchard had been in his family for generations, but on this particular day, the normal rhythm of work would be disrupted by something that changed everything in an instant. Jorge was working alongside two neighbours, Raúl and Mateo, picking limes on the far side of the grove. Workers had recently cleared the area, leaving a pile of cut tree branches nearby. The three men joked about the oppressive heat as they moved among the low branches, filling bags with limes. Jorge wore his wide hat pushed back on his head and a faded old shirt. Reaching for a low branch, he shifted his weight to pull the fruit closer. The orchard floor was hard dirt, covered with fallen leaves and thin roots. The pile of cut branches offered cool shade for mice, rats, and small reptiles. A patch of wild plants marked the edge of the orchard, and the low treetops cast long, shifting shadows across the ground. It was so quiet that small sounds, like fruit falling or clothes brushing against bark, were easily heard. The men were focused on their work and conversation, perhaps not fully aware of the potential dangers lurking nearby. A type of poisonous snake called the terciopelo, Brops asper, locally known as the naka, lives in Central America. These snakes are thick-bodied, typically growing to be 3 to 5 feet long. They possess a highly dangerous venom that destroys skin and muscle, causes severe bleeding at the bite site, and can disrupt blood clotting and blood press throughout the body. These snakes blend seamlessly with fallen leaves, often remaining perfectly still until someone comes too close. Their bite typically causes excruciating pain, and the affected area swells rapidly. That morning, neighbours had mentioned seeing more snakes due to recent rains. Jorge's wife had even urged him to wear boots while clearing brush. The pile of cut branches where they were working was a temporary heap of trimmings, precisely the kind of place where snakes like to hide. Raúl later recalled warning Jorge to be careful, but Jorge dismissed their concerns, saying he would work quickly. As Jorge shifted his position, the snake struck with terrifying speed. It burst out from the leaves and bit the skin just above his ankle. Raúl and Mateo heard Jorge cry out in sharp pain and saw him pull his foot back, clutching at the wound. Before they could react, the snake bit him a second time. Dark blood stained the dirt where his foot had been. The pain was immediate and intense. Jorge doubled over, dropping the fruit he was holding. Within minutes, his lower leg began to swell, and the skin became bruised and discoloured. He started vomiting, sweating profusely, and his face turned pale. Raúl quickly tied a piece of cloth above the bite marks, and they immobilized Jorge's leg with a splint made from a broom handle. A neighbor brought a small wooden cart, and they lifted Jorge into it, pushing it towards the dirt road that led back to the village. The journey to the clinic was bumpy and slow. Dust coated Jorge's damp skin, and he grew confused, speaking incoherently and drifting in and out of consciousness. At the small village clinic, a nurse examined his swollen leg, noting his weak pulse and low blood press. The clinic had basic medical supplies, but no anti-venom, the specialized medicine needed to treat snake bites. The staff used their radio to contact the regional health center, requesting assistance. But the nearest supply of anti-venom and a properly equipped ambulance were hours away. Jorge's condition deteriorated rapidly. He became increasingly disoriented, and his breathing grew shallow. The medical staff was helpless to improve his condition. By evening, despite their efforts to stop the bleeding and assist his breathing, Jorge had died at the clinic. Raúl later said that they tried to kill the snake, but it disappeared into the thick pile of leaves. I've always been struck by how a single event can reshape an entire community. Take the village where Jorge lived. His flip phone and work notebook were eventually found, returned to his family, though they were, sadly, stained. In the weeks that followed, a traveling veterinarian came to the village, bringing a small supply of anti-venom. He taught the local people basic emergency response, how to make splints, apply press bandages, and when not to use tourniquets. The villagers cleaned up and marked the brush pile area. A simple pole marker was placed where Jorge had been bitten. His wife, as a visible reminder of his absence, began wearing his wide-brimmed hat during harvest. And from that time forward, each harvest season began with a serious reminder to all workers about being careful. It was May 2nd, 2018, when the air over the Cross River felt heavy and still. Mina Belogan, just 19, had returned from university a week earlier. She spent most afternoons at the river. I understand she was known for her lively personality, often bringing her cousins to swim. The older villagers warned them about snakes being more active during the dry season, but Mina didn't think much of it. She believed nothing dangerous ever happened in the shallow water. On this day, she convinced 4 of her cousins to join her for a swim. They left their sandals and shirts on the rocks before walking into the cool water. Mina, with plans to return to school soon, talked about starting a small community project, teaching younger children how to swim safely. She had always seen the river as a place full of life, not danger, and her cousins trusted her. The afternoon was the kind where every sound carried far. The river's surface was calm, reflecting the cloudless sky, though locals often said the water was never truly quiet. Something was always moving underneath. They chose a wide, shallow part of the river with muddy banks favoured by fishermen. The air was humid, and dragonflies flew just above the surface. Even though it was bright, the thick plants on the other side cast long shadows over the deeper parts. African rock pythons, the biggest snakes on the continent, can grow to over 20 feet long. They hunt by staying still until an animal comes close, then bite with powerful jaws, wrapping their body around their prey to squeeze it until it stops breathing. Attacks on people are rare, but these snakes are known to catch and eat goats, dogs, even large animals like antelopes. During the dry season, they often hunt near shrinking water sources where animals come to drink. Earlier that week, an older fisherman had warned Mina's uncle about a very large python lying in the sun on a log nearby. The children had been told not to swim until the rains came and raised the water levels. But Mina insisted the shallow bend where they swam was safe. She had been in the water for almost an hour, playing and floating on her back, when one of her cousins saw something long and dark moving toward them. At first, they thought it was just a tree branch, but when it curved and moved silently across the surface, fear spread through the group. The shape moved forward quickly, revealing the patterned body of an enormous python. The snake attacked with shocking speed. Its jaws locked onto Mina's side before its body wrapped around her. Her cousins screamed as the snake's coils tightened, forcing the air out of her lungs. The water became violent as Mina fought against the snake, then went still as the python dragged her into deeper water. The children ran back to the village, screaming for help. It took the men several minutes to grab their long knives and run to the river. By the time they got there, the snake was still moving in the water, having pulled Mina deeper. The men went in and cut at the python repeatedly until it finally let her go. When they pulled her onto the muddy riverbank, she had clearly been underwater for several minutes. Her skin was cold and pale, her lips a deep blue. The villagers tried pressing on her chest and blowing air into her mouth, while others stood back in shocked silence. When they pressed, water came out of her mouth and nose, mixing with the mud under her head. Someone recorded the desperate scene with a phone. The shouting, the rushing water, the knives hitting the snake. Their efforts continued for several minutes, but there was no sign she was breathing. Mina's body was placed on a mat near the water as the villagers gathered in silence. For weeks afterward, the river bend remained empty. Fishermen refused to throw their nets there, calling the area cursed. The village learned that even familiar places could hide unexpected dangers, especially when wild animals were more likely to come near human areas looking for water and food. Mina's dream of teaching children to swim safely took on new meaning as the community worked to prevent similar tragedies. It was June 10, 2013, in Sweetwater, Texas. The fairground was extremely hot under a clear sky. Heat rose off the tarps and metal bleachers, turning what should have been a routine demonstration into a day where small mistakes would have serious consequences. Samuel "Sammy" Price was 38 years old and had been a volunteer snake handler at the annual rattlesnake roundup since he was a child. He did repair work around town and showed up every year to handle snakes for visitors. People respected him. I've seen how quickly things can go wrong, even with the most experienced among us. Experience can reduce danger, but it can't eliminate it. I remember reading about a snake handler named Sammy, a steady man with years under his belt. He taught new volunteers, showing them the ropes, hands-on, believing that practical experience was the best teacher. Local people trusted Sammy because he was careful, never rushed, and always corrected mistakes gently. But one year, the festival was bigger, the schedule tighter. Sammy, moving between snake pits all morning, answering questions, had skipped breakfast and was feeling it. He thought it was just the heat and exhaustion, but he kept working, seeing it as his duty. The snake pits were shallow, surrounded by temporary barriers, a raised platform for the announcer, folding chairs for the audience. The air was thick with the smell of fried food, car exhaust and dust. Shade cloths and water were nearby, but the layout was cramped, volunteers stuck in the sun. The crowd leaned against the fence, phones up, recording everything. The setup was designed for clear viewing, but it reduced space for handlers and limited opportunities to cool down. Western diamondback rattlesnakes, strong pit vipers, 4 to 5 feet long, their venom causing tissue damage, bleeding, potentially triggering shock. A large adult can strike with surprising speed. Under stress, a snake might twist unexpectedly, changing the handler's grip, exposing skin. Even skilled handlers can be bitten when a snake is already upset, or when heat and repeated handling raise its stress. Earlier that day, organizers had warned volunteers about taking turns, limiting heavy handling during the hottest hours. A small accident that morning prompted a formal reminder: take breaks, drink water. Medical personnel were standing by with IV fluids and antivenom. Sammy heard the instructions, agreed, but the crowd and the schedule pulled him back. He took a heavy Western diamondback from a colleague, stepped into the pit with his glove and hook, lifted the snake in a practiced motion. The crowd relaxed, his presence calming. But then the snake shifted, stressed, twisted sharply, lunged, its fangs sinking into the soft tissue near Sammy's elbow. Pain shot through his arm. He signaled he was, but his face turned red, sweat beaded on his forehead. He kept talking to the crowd for minutes, but his breathing grew shallow, and he asked for a chair. The bite swelled rapidly, discoloration spreading down his forearm. Soon, the swelling reached his shoulder, the skin darkening with bruises as tissue damage progressed. Volunteers moved him to the first aid tent. Paramedics applied press, started IV fluids, pushed antivenom. His breathing grew shallower, his skin cold, blotched with bruises. Despite the quick treatment, his blood pressure collapsed. His pulse faded. Witnesses recalled the frantic efforts to keep him conscious as medics called for an airlift that never arrived in time. Afterward, his friends and fellow handlers organized training sessions, invited regional medics to review emergency procedures, practice drills. A younger relative began helping at the fits, prioritizing breaks and hydration over putting on a show. The festival board documented the incident, created a checklist: demonstration times, maximum handling times, required breaks, a fast evacuation plan. The silverback sat calmly beside Erica's lifeless body for the next 4 hours, occasionally grooming blood from his hands. When I read that line for the first time, it stayed with me for days. It's a stark image, isn't it? The raw power, the sudden violence, followed by an almost serene stillness. The story of Erica and Caesar is a tragic one, a confluence of human hubris and the untamed nature of a wild animal. Warning signs, as they often do, had been mounting for months. Caesar's behavior had been deteriorating, a direct result of improper care. We must remember that Western lowland gorillas are immensely powerful primates. A fully grown male possesses the strength of perhaps 10 humans. Their hands can exert crushing force, and their canine teeth can tear through flesh and bone. Despite their generally peaceful nature in the wild, gorillas in captivity, especially when stressed, can become unpredictably violent. Caesar had been showing classic signs of psychological distress, stemming from the inadequate conditions and lack of social interaction. These magnificent creatures require specialized care, something few private individuals can truly provide. On that fateful evening, Erica's frustration reached its breaking point. Caesar sat defiantly in the center of his enclos, ignoring her increasingly loud commands to enter his night quarters. Determined to assert her dominance, she grabbed a makeshift electric prod fashioned from old logging equipment and unlocked the heavy gate to his 20x30-foot reinforced pen. A decision that would prove fatal. As she stepped inside, wielding the electrical device, Caesar's behavior shifted instantly. He went from passive resistance to explosive aggression. The 375-pound silverback charged across the enclos with terrifying speed. His massive body slammed into Erica's chest with the force of a small vehicle, launching her backward into the metal fence. The rusted metal cut deep into her back as Caesar's enormous hands grabbed her face, his thumbs pressing into her eye sockets with crushing press. Blood streamed down her cheeks as his fingernails tore at her skin. Caesar's powerful jaws clamped down on her left ear, severing it completely. Erica's screams echoed across the empty rainforest as the gorilla grabbed her right hand, which still clutched the makeshift prod. His bite force crushed 3 fingers at the knuckles, severing them entirely. The enraged primate lifted Erica's body off the ground and shook her violently. Her shoulder dislocated as Caesar slammed her face first into the concrete floor. Her nose shattered on impact, creating a growing pool of blood beneath her head. The gorilla then grabbed her right leg with both massive hands and twisted with brutal force, snapping her femur bone. The jagged fracture tore through muscle and skin. Caesar positioned himself over Erica's prone form and brought both fists down on her rib cage. 6 ribs cracked simultaneously, the broken bones puncturing both lungs. Her breathing became shallow as blood filled her chest cavity. For his final attack, Caesar grabbed Erica's head between his massive palms and squeezed with methodical press. Her skull cracked, and brain matter leaked onto the concrete floor. Her body went completely limp as life left her. Local villagers discovered the scene the following morning, when the usual sounds of morning feeding never came. Cameroonian authorities launched an immediate investigation into the illegal operation, while wildlife officials worked to safely relocate Caesar to the Lima Wildlife Center. The incident sparked renewed debate about foreign nationals operating illegal wildlife facilities and the dangers posed to both operators and local communities. Government agents seized all remaining animals from the property within days. Erica's family released a statement expressing their grief, while acknowledging the inherent dangers of keeping such powerful animals in captivity. Now, let's turn our attention to another incident, one that unfolded on July 22, 2017, along the pristine banks of Idaho's Salmon River. Towering pine trees cast long shadows across the rushing water. The remote wilderness area, known for its crystal-clear streams and abundant wildlife, had become the perfect destination for the Price family's annual camping adventure. Landon Price, a 34-year-old construction foreman, had driven his wife Sarah and their 2 young children, Emma and Jake, to this secluded spot just 30 yards from the riverbank. What made this trip different from previous years was the modified dog crate secured in the back of their pickup truck, containing their most unusual family member. 2 years earlier, Landon had purchased Scout, a mountain cougar cub, from an exotic animal dealer operating in the grey areas of wildlife law. The construction worker's overconfident personality had convinced him that his experience with domestic animals would translate perfectly to raising a wild predator. He kept the growing cougar in a reinforced shed behind their suburban home, telling curious neighbors it was simply an unusually large dog breed. Sarah, an elementary school teacher, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Scout's presence, especially after the children began complaining that the animal's eyes looked mean during feeding times. The warning signs had been mounting for weeks. Scout had killed 3 neighborhood cats in the past month, leaving their partially eaten remains scattered around the property. Just 2 weeks prior, the cougar had escaped from his enclosure and stalked the mail carrier for several blocks before Landon managed to recapture him. Local game wardens had received multiple reports of unusual animal sounds coming from the Price residence, but bureaucratic delays had prevented immediate investigation. Mountain cougars are apex predators, perfectly designed for stealth hunting, with powerful hind legs capable of propelling their muscular bodies over 20 feet in a single bound. Adult males can weigh up to 140 pounds of pure muscle, equipped with razor-sharp retractable claws and canine teeth designed to deliver precise killing bites to the neck and spine. Unlike domestic cats, I've seen firsthand how even cougars raised in captivity never truly lose their wild instincts. Their hunting behaviors, in fact, often become even more pronounced in unfamiliar settings, where their territorial instincts kick into high gear. I recall the tragic case of Landon, who made a fatal error when he released Scout, his 3-year-old cougar, from its transport crate. He simply wanted to let Scout stretch and explore the wilderness. Landon genuinely thought Scout's upbringing had somehow tamed the animal's wild nature, treating the predator almost like an oversized house cat. As the family set up their fishing gear near the water, Scout emerged from confinement, immediately surveying the unfamiliar territory. His tawny coat blended perfectly with the brush, his yellow eyes methodically scanning, cataloguing every sound and movement. The 140-pound cougar's predatory instincts took over when Landon walked toward the river to fill water containers. Scout's pupils dilated, and he crouched low behind a fallen log, his powerful muscles coiling. The cougar's tail twitched in that telltale hunting pattern as he calculated the distance and timing with deadly precision. Then, in complete silence, Scout launched himself through the air, covering 20 feet in a single explosive leap. His powerful body struck Landon squarely in the back. The cougar's 4-inch claws sank deep into Landon's shoulders and back, perfectly designed to grip struggling prey and prevent escape. The predator's jaws clamped down on the back of Landon's neck with surgical precision. Scout's canine teeth, evolved for this very killing technique, punctured the cervical vertebrae, severing the spinal cord instantly. The bite caused immediate paralysis from the neck down, leaving Landon utterly helpless, his face submerged. He drowned within 90 seconds. His body went limp as Scout maintained his grip, following millions of years of evolutionary programming to and prey is subdued before feeding. The cougar then dragged Landon's lifeless body toward the brush, instinctively caching his kill away from potential scavengers. Sarah grabbed Emma and Jake, rushing them to the safety of their locked truck, where they remained for 3 terrifying hours until park rangers arrived. Authorities launched an immediate investigation into the illegal possession of the mountain cougar, while wildlife officials worked to safely capture Scout. The incident reignited debates about private exotic animal ownership and the inherent dangers these predators pose. Then there was Marcus Ellison on September 8, 2015. His story unfolded on a sprawling ranch property in South Texas, where mesquite trees dotted the landscape under a star-filled sky. The remote 50-acre estate sat miles from the nearest neighbor, providing the perfect isolation for Marcus's dangerous hobby. The 41-year-old oil rig worker had converted an old barn into a makeshift big cat facility, complete with reinforced enclose and feeding areas. Marcus shared the property with his girlfriend, Lisa Chen, a 28-year-old veterinary technician, who had grown increasingly concerned about their unusual housemate. 4 years earlier, Marcus had purchased Luna, a 6-month-old jaguar cub, from a black market dealer operating along the Texas-Mexico border. His thrill-seeking personality and desire to collect dangerous animals as status symbols had driven him to spend his oil rig earnings on exotic pets. Luna had grown from an adorable spotted kitten into a powerful 180-pound predator. But Marcus genuinely believed their bond from her cubhood would protect him from any danger. Lisa had been pressuring him for months to surrender Luna to a proper sanctuary, especially after witnessing the jaguar's increasingly erratic behavior. The warning signs had been mounting steadily over the past week. Luna had been refusing all food for 4 consecutive days, despite Marcus offering her favorite cuts of meat. The jaguar had begun territorial marking throughout the house, leaving her scent on furniture and walls in a clear display of dominance. Her obsessive pacing had worn visible paths in the dirt floor of her enclosure, and Lisa noticed that Luna's pupils remained constantly dilated, indicating severe psychological stress. Neighbors living miles away reported hearing strange vocalizations echoing across the countryside during the night hours. Jaguars are the 3rd largest big cats in the world and possess the strongest bite force of any feline species, capable of crushing turtle shells and caiman skulls with ease. These apex predators are perfectly designed killing machines, with muscular bodies built for explosive power, and jaws that can exert over 1,500 pounds of press per square inch. Unlike other big cats that typically suffocate their prey, jaguars deliver precise killing bites directly through the skull or spine, making them one of the most efficient predators in the animal kingdom. Even hand-raised jaguars retain all their wild instincts and can become unpredictably aggressive when stressed or challenged. Marcus made his fatal mistake when he decided to enter Luna's enclosure without backup or safety equipment. Concerned about her 4-day food refusal, he believed their years-long bond would allow him to safely investigate her condition. He unlocked the gate to her 30 by 40-foot pen and stepped inside, carrying only a small flashlight to illuminate the darkness. Luna sat motionless in the shadows, her yellow eyes reflecting the beam as he approached. The 180-pound jaguar had been waiting for this moment. As Marcus knelt 15 feet away and extended his hand in what he believed was a gesture of comfort, Luna's predatory instincts took complete control. Her powerful muscles, coiled like steel springs, propelled her across the enclosure in 2 swift bounds. Luna's attack was swift and devastatingly precise. Her massive body slammed into Marcus's chest with tremendous force. I'll never forget the image of Luna, calmly grooming blood from her pores after she'd killed Marcus. The scene was a grim testament to the raw power of wild instincts. Her jaws locked around his throat with surgical precision, her canine teeth piercing deep. A jaguar's bite force of 1,500 lb per square inch crushed his windpipe instantly. The combination of crushed airways and severed blood vessels caused him to lose consciousness within seconds. She maintained her grip for 3 full minutes. It all happened because of a tragic misjudgment, and it sparked renewed calls for stricter regulations on exotic animal ownership. Marcus's family released a statement acknowledging the inherent dangers of keeping wild predators, urging others to learn from their loss. It was June 14, 2018. In Homestead, Florida, a place where manicured lawns hid a dangerous secret. Behind a modest rental house was an elaborate backyard pond system, 40 x 60 feet of artificially maintained water that had become home to one of nature's most dangerous predators. Brianna Ellis, a 26-year-old marine biology graduate student, had been using this location for her thesis research on reptilian behavior patterns. She shared the property with her friends Kevin Torres, a 27-year-old photographer documenting her work, and Amanda Walsh, a 25-year-old social media influencer who had rented the house specifically for its unique backyard feature. 2 years earlier, Brianna had rescued Brutus, a 9-foot American alligator, from a failing roadside attraction. He'd been malnourished and living in deplorable conditions, and Brianna believed she could offer him a better life. Her academic knowledge of reptilian behavior had convinced her that she could safely study Brutus while providing him proper care. Amanda's landlord, of course, had no idea that a 350 lb apex predator was living in his backyard pond. The warning signs had been escalating dramatically. Brutus had become increasingly aggressive during feeding times, lunging at the pond's edge whenever anyone approached. Despite her friends' protests, Brianna had continued hand-feeding the massive reptile, believing her scientific understanding gave her an advantage. Neighbors had been complaining about strange splashing sounds, and Brutus had been floating motionless for hours, displaying classic hunting behavior. American alligators are among the most efficient predators on Earth, perfectly evolved killing machines. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weights exceeding 800 libasi, with jaws capable of exerting nearly 3,000 libs of pres per square inch. Their bite force is strong enough to crush a bowling ball, and their signature death roll technique can dismember prey within seconds. Brianna made her fatal mistake as the Florida sun began setting. She had dropped her pH testing equipment into the deeper section of the pond earlier that day, and she wanted to retrieve it manually. Despite Kevin's suggestions to use a pool net, Brianna insisted on entering the water herself. This decision proved catastrophic, as dusk represents the most active hunting period for alligators. As Brianna waded into the pond, the water reaching her thighs, Brutus began his approach with the stealth that had made his species apex predators for millions of years. The 350 lb alligator moved through the water with incredible precision, his massive body creating no visible wake as he closed the distance. Brianna bent down to retrieve her submerged equipment, completely focused on the task, and unaware that Brutus had positioned himself just 6 feet away. The alligator remained perfectly motionless beneath the surface, his eyes and nostrils barely visible above the waterline as he prepared for his explosive assault. The attack came with devastating force and lightning speed. Brutus launched himself upward and forward in one fluid motion, his massive jaws opening wide. His bite encompassed Brianna's entire right thigh, and his jaw press of nearly 3,000 lb per square inch crushed her femur bone instantly. Brianna's screams pierced the evening air as Brutus immediately began his signature death roll technique. The powerful alligator spun his body rapidly, using his muscular tail for propulsion, creating a whirlpool of churning water and blood. The rotational force generated by his 350 lb body tore Brianna's leg completely away at the hip joint within seconds. The severed femoral artery released massive amounts of blood into the water, causing immediate shock. Before Brianna could escape, Brutus released the severed limb and attacked again. There's a chilling case I remember reading about, a story that underscores just how quickly the line between rescuer and victim can blur. It involved a man, a bear, and a remote cabin deep in the Adirondack Mountains. The details still haunt me. It was October 3rd, 2016, in the remote wilderness of the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York. Towering evergreens stretched endlessly toward grey autumn skies. 15 miles from the nearest neighbor, a weathered log cabin sat nestled among the dense forest, accessible only by a narrow dirt road. Sean shared his remote sanctuary with Kodiak, an 8-year-old American black bear weighing 400 pounds. He had illegally acquired the animal as an injured cub 3 years prior, claiming to rescue it from certain death in the wild. His obsession with proving his rehabilitation methods were superior to state-approved programs had driven him to keep Kodiak despite losing his professional credentials. The bear lived in a reinforced room within the cabin, a makeshift arrangement that had grown increasingly inadequate as Kodiak matured. Sean's journal entries from recent weeks revealed growing paranoia about the bear's intentions and his deteriorating mental state from years of isolation. The warning signs had been escalating dramatically over the past month. Kodiak had been systematically destroying the cabin's interior, tearing apart furniture, and clawing deep gouges in the wooden walls. The bear had become increasingly aggressive when Sean attempted to limit his food portions, displaying territorial behavior that should have served as a clear warning. Most concerning was Kodiak's obsessive testing of door and window strength, repeatedly pushing against barriers as if calculating escape routes, American black bears are deceptively powerful predators despite their smaller size compared to grizzlies. With adult males capable of reaching speeds of 30 meters and possessing the strength to overturn boulders weighing several hundred pounds, their powerful jaws can exert over 800 pounds of press per square inch, easily capable of crushing human skulls, while their 4-inch claws are designed for climbing and digging, but prove devastatingly effective weapons. Black bears are naturally nocturnal creatures, most active during twilight and nighttime hours when their predatory instincts are heightened. Sean made his fatal mistake at 2:30 in the morning, when he decided to enter Kodiak's reinforced room to retrieve his damaged laptop and camera equipment. The bear appeared to be sleeping peacefully in the corner of the 15x20 foot space, his massive form barely visible in the darkness. Sean desperately needed to recover his electronics before they were completely destroyed by the bear's ongoing rampage. He stepped quietly into the room, carrying only a small flashlight, believing Kodiak was in deep sleep. What Sean failed to realize was that Kodiak had been awake for hours, waiting with the patience that made black bears such effective predators. The bear's naturally nocturnal behavior meant his senses were at peak alertness during these early morning hours, and captivity had made him increasingly territorial about his confined space. The 400-pound black bear moved with surprising speed and agility. Kodiak rose to his full height of 7 feet and charged across the room in 3 powerful strides. Sean had no time to react as the bear's enormous frame filled his vision. Kodiak's first strike came from his massive right paw, equipped with 4-inch claws designed by nature for climbing and digging. The blow struck Sean squarely in the chest with tremendous force, his claws raking 4 parallel gashes across his ribcage that penetrated deep into muscle and bone. The impact launched Sean backward into the reinforced wall with bone-crushing force. Before Sean could even attempt to defend himself, Kodiak pressed his attack with methodical efficiency. The bear's powerful jaws clamped down on Sean's head, encompassing his skull from temple to temple. Kodiak's bite force of 800 pounds per square inch crushed Sean's skull like an eggshell, causing immediate and catastrophic brain trauma. Brain matter leaked between the bear's teeth as he shook his massive head violently. Sean's body went completely limp within seconds, but Kodiak's defensive rage kept driving the assault. The bear mauled with relentless power, claws raking and jaws crushing bone, as if to eliminate a threat rather than feed. In his fury, Kodiak tore into Sean's torso, ribs splintering under the press, leaving a scene of raw devastation born not of hunger, but of instinctive dominance and fear. The attack continued for 15 minutes before Kodiak finally retreated to his corner, leaving Sean's partially consumed remains scattered across the wooden floor. The bear sat calmly, grooming blood from its claws and muzzle. Sean's body was discovered 3 days later when concerned neighbors noticed smoke was no longer rising from the cabin's chimney. Local authorities launched an eye. I've always been drawn to stories where humans and animals intersect, sometimes tragically. I remember one case in Texas that stayed with me. It started with an investigation into the illegal possession of a black bear. But that was just the beginning. It was March 22nd, 2015, on the outskirts of Houston. The air was thick, almost soupy. Behind a chain-link fence, a Bengal tiger paced restlessly. The owner, Michael Torres, was a 41-year-old mechanic, a loner who preferred the company of engines and animals. He had ball pythons, iguanas, a serval, and then Raja, a 6-year-old Bengal tiger he'd gotten from a private breeder. He kept Raja in a large enclosure, reinforced with steel and heavy wire. Neighbours would sometimes see him walking with the tiger, talking to it like a friend. He believed Raja recognized his scent and tone, that the animal would never hurt him. He said it was about trust, earning respect through calm handling, not fear. That afternoon was overcast and sticky. A friend, Luis Alvarez, stopped by to borrow a wrench and watched as Michael carried tools toward the cage. Raja was pacing more than usual, tail lashing. There was construction noise nearby, which Michael said the tiger didn't like. He thought the tiger would settle down once he started cleaning. Bengal tigers are apex predators. Their bite can crush bone. Even those raised from cubs retain their hunting instincts. Male tigers can weigh over 400 pounds and strike with incredible force. And they don't always growl as a warning. Movement itself can trigger an attack. Louis stood about 20 yards away as Michael opened the inner gate. He was replacing old straw, raking droppings. He'd left the outer gate partially open for convenience. Louis said Raja kept pacing, muscles tensing. Michael glanced up, muttered something, and went back to work. Then Louis saw the tiger freeze. Its ears flattened, body crouched low, tail twitching. A second later, Raja lunged. The impact was a hollow sound of metal and flesh. The tiger's paw raked across Michael's face, knocking him down. He screamed, clutching his jaw, trying to crawl toward the gate. Raja followed and clamped its jaws around his neck and shoulder, dragging him deeper into the enclosure. Louis shouted and threw a wrench, but it just clattered against the fence. Michael swung the shovel's handle, hitting Raja's snout, but the tiger's jaws tightened. Louis threw gravel, screaming for the tiger to stop. Raja shook its head, slamming Michael's body against the ground. Michael's arm twitched once, then went still. Raja kept biting, dragging the body under a metal shelter. Louis ran for his truck and called 911. When deputies arrived, they waited for animal control. But when Raja charged the fencing, an officer fired his rifle, hitting the tiger in the shoulder. Raja collapsed near the shelter. Michael's body was badly damaged, with massive lacerations. One arm was partially severed, and his face was unrecognizable. Investigators noted there was no secondary containment system, no safety barrier or secondary lock. The open gate gave the tiger full access. Animal control removed Raja's body that night. Michael's sister handled the arrangements quietly, declining interviews. Fewer than 20 people attended the funeral. Neighbours left flowers at the fence. The straw inside was still stained dark where the attack happened. Then there's the case in Surabaya, Indonesia, on January 14, 2016. The air was heavy with humidity, the sounds of the city distant. Behind a row of warehouses, one lot stood apart, quiet, except for the clank of metal and the scrape of claws on concrete. Inside, a private experiment in control was nearing its breaking point. Ahmad Firdos, a 34-year-old auto parts importer, had a fascination with exotic animals. Years earlier, he'd been captivated by Komodo dragons. When an acquaintance offered him a hatchling, Ahmad accepted, paying in cash and never telling his family. Over 2 years, the reptile grew from a pet into a formidable presence. The pen Ahmad built behind his warehouse was solid, thick steel mesh reinforced with concrete. I've read about animals that were treated like misunderstood companions, when all along, to the animal, the human was prey. It's a hard truth to accept. It makes you wonder about the boundaries we think exist. Ahmad, in Indonesia, had raised a Komodo dragon from a juvenile. He had built it a small concrete habitat at the base of his warehouse, but it was small, designed for a creature half its current size. He fed it chicken and goat, often by hand, proud of its trust in him. The few employees who had seen it warned him to be careful. One worker, Yuri Santoso, told him the animal was no longer tame, but Ahmad only smiled and said it knew him. That Thursday morning was still and overcast, the smell of diesel drifting from the nearby road. Ahmad had skipped feeding the previous evening, distracted by a shipment problem. By sunrise, he noticed the dragon's water basin overturned and filthy. Wanting to clean it before the day's work began, the gate creaked as he entered the enclosure. The animal was in the far corner, body motionless. Komodo dragons can grow up to 10 feet and deliver a bite strong enough to crush bone. Their venom contains anticoagulants and toxins that cause rapid blood loss and lowered blood pressure, weakening prey through shock. They are ambush predators, capable of bursts of speed despite their heavy frame. In captivity, they can become defensive or aggressive if handled frequently or underfed. Yudi, working in the front section of the warehouse, heard the clang of metal and a low thud. Then came a sharp cry. He dropped his clipboard and ran toward the back, rounding the corner just as Ahmad fell. The dragon had latched onto his right calf, its teeth sunk deep through fabric and skin. Blood darkened the concrete beneath him. Ahmad kicked out with his free leg, yelling for Yudi to get help. The dragon released, its head jerking back before it lunged again, jaws clamping down on Ahmad's forearm. Ahmad tried to pull away, but the animal twisted its head side to side, shaking loose strips of muscle. Yudi grabbed a metal pole, leaning by the fence, and swung hard, striking the dragon's side. It turned, mouth gaping, tongue flicking, tail whipping across the floor. When it faced him again, its throat bulged with each breath, saliva stringing from its jaws. Ahmad tried to crawl backward, leaving a thick smear of blood behind. The dragon lunged once more, this time catching his side just below the ribs, its jaws locked, teeth sinking deep as it began to pull, ripping through skin and tissue. Ahmad's scream broke into a gasping rasp. Yudi struck again and again, shouting, until the creature finally backed off a few feet. Ahmad slumped onto his back, eyes open, one hand pressed weakly against the wound. The concrete beneath him gleamed dark red, the smell of iron thick in the humid air. Yudi ran to the gate, dragging a burlap sack from a supply shelf. He waved it near the dragon's face, forcing it to focus on the movement. The animal lunged toward the sack, and Yudi managed to pull the gate shut, locking it with trembling hands. He turned to Ahmad, who was still. The blood loss had been catastrophic. By the time emergency responders arrived from the nearest clinic, Ahmad was already gone. Later reports confirmed he had suffered multiple deep lacerations to the leg, arm, and abdomen, with significant internal bleeding. Death was attributed to massive exsanguination and traumatic shock from the venom's anticoagulant effects. Veterinarians who examined the animal later said it had shown signs of food aggression, behavior triggered when prey, or a familiar handler moves suddenly during feeding. Police secured the warehouse and contacted Indonesia's Natural Resources Conservation Agency. The Komodo dragon, measuring just under 7 feet and weighing nearly 140 pounds, was sedated and transported to a wildlife rehabilitation centre in Banyangi. Officials identified it as originating from Rinca Island, confirming it had been obtained through illegal trade networks. The story reached local newspapers for only a day before being buried beneath business and traffic reports. Neighbours remembered Ahmad as generous, the man who sponsored youth football games and handed out bottled water to delivery drivers. But within the warehouse community, the story circulated quietly, a warning told in fragments. Those who had seen the pen said he treated the dragon like a misunderstood companion, never realizing that to it he was always prey. It was May 30th, 2014, near Bozeman, Montana. The morning was clear and still, the kind of quiet that hung heavy before the heat built up. A line of spruce trees framed the small animal sanctuary Mark Jennings had built from the ground up. Inside, one enclosure stood larger than the rest, its occupant pacing slow, deliberate circles. By noon, that silence would be shattered. Mark Jennings was 49, a former wildlife handler for film productions. He had left the industry in his 30s to start an educational sanctuary outside Bozeman. He ran school tours, wildlife demonstrations, and rescue programs for injured raptors and foxes. His pride was a 1,000-pound brown bear named Bruno, raised from a cub after being orphaned during a legal hunt in Alaska. To Mark, Bruno represented proof that wild animals could bond with humans through trust rather than fear. Bruno had been with him for nearly 12 years. He was intelligent, food-driven, and typically calm around people he knew. The enclosure was spacious with reinforced fencing, a pond, and a shaded feeding platform. Mark managed most care himself, but occasionally brought in help. Aaron Cole was one of those helpers, a licensed trainer who had worked with Bruno multiple times without issue. She followed protocols carefully, but admitted she always kept her distance during feeding. Mark trusted her completely, enough to call her one of the few people Bruno recognized. Brown bears of Kodiak lineage are among the largest terrestrial carnivores, capable of standing over 9 feet tall and delivering a bite force exceeding 1,200 pounds per square inch. While generally solitary and predictable in the wild, captivity can alter their tolerance thresholds. Even long-term handlers face risk if food, scent, or routine changes. During feeding, aggression can surface suddenly, triggered by... I've spent years studying animal behavior, but some stories still haunt me. This one, about what happened at a wildlife sanctuary, is particularly difficult. It's a stark reminder of the unpredictable power that lies within even familiar creatures, and the tragic consequences that can arise from a single lapse in judgment. The sanctuary sat on rolling pasture, bordered by pines. It was early summer, which meant strong sunlight and restless animals. I can almost smell the hay and meat in the air from here." That morning the enclos were quiet, except for the sound of pacing claws and the creak of metal gates. Aaron arrived early to prepare Bruno's meal. 15 pounds of meat mixed with supplements. Mark had left town the previous evening to visit his sister. He reminded Aaron to feed Bruno at the usual time, late morning, and to check the water trough afterward. The next day, Mark texted Aaron around 10 a.m., but received no reply. He assumed she was busy, then began his drive back. When he pulled into the gravel lot just after noon, he noticed the outer gate to the bear enclos was half open. The feeding pail lay overturned beside it. Seconds later, he heard screaming from beyond the fence line. He ran toward the sound, rounding the corner to see Bruno towering near the feeding platform. Aaron was on the ground beneath him, her right arm torn open from shoulder to wrist. She kicked weakly, her clothes soaked dark with blood. The bear's movements were methodical, broad swipes, a deep huffing sound between each motion. Mark froze for a moment, then shouted Bruno's name and ran for a rake leaning against the fence. The noise drew Bruno's attention immediately. He turned, fur bristling, and lunged. The charge covered the distance in a second. The impact knocked Mark flat, the air leaving his lungs in a single sound. Bruno's paw struck his chest again, the claws sinking deep enough to tear through fabric and skin. Aaron saw Mark roll, trying to crawl back toward the gate, but the bear dropped onto him, pressing its full weight down. Bruno bit into Mark's left shoulder, shaking violently. The bear adjusted its grip, jaws closing on his neck. Investigators later reconstructed the sequence from Aaron's statement and evidence found inside the enclos. The entire attack lasted under 30 seconds. Aaron dragged herself backward, her hand leaving red streaks along the concrete. She made it to the open gate, pushing herself through the dirt until she collapsed near the outer fence. Blood loss blurred her vision, but she heard Mark's shouting, "Stop!" abruptly replaced by heavy breathing and the rhythmic scrape of claws on the ground. Deputies arrived minutes later, responding to a 911 call placed by a neighbour who had heard the screams. They found Bruno standing over Mark's body, huffing and lowering his head as they approached. When an officer fired a warning shot, the bear reared back, roaring. The second volley hit him directly in the chest and shoulder. Bruno staggered, exhaled sharply. The medical report confirmed that Mark had died from blunt and penetrating trauma to the thorax and cervical region. Aaron survived after multiple surgeries to repair her arm and shoulder. Investigators determined that the feeding gate had been improperly secured, allowing Bruno to push through before the pail was placed. Food aggression was cited as the cause, a sudden response to perceived competition over the meal. In the months following the attack, Aaron withdrew from animal work entirely. She sold her training equipment, moved to Missoula, and refused interviews. Friends said she became quiet, often waking from sleep at the faint sound of metal gates or animal breathing. She never returned to the sanctuary grounds. Then there's the story of Johan Boa on August 19, 2017, in the Limpopo province of South Africa. The air was heavy from the previous night's storm, the ground damp and the acacia trees still dripping. At Johann's game lodge, in the lion enclosure beyond the guest bungalows, the large male paced in slow, deliberate circles. It was mid-morning, and tourists had yet to arrive, so Johann decided to tend to the animal himself. It was a routine he had performed hundreds of times before, but this time it would end differently. Johann was 46, a former ranger who had turned his modest patch of bushland into a profitable wildlife lodge. He was known for his confidence around big cats, comfortable where others were cautious. Over the years, he had cultivated an image of connection between man and predator. His prized attraction was Simba, a 7-year-old male lion raised at the lodge since cubhood. Tourists paid to pose with him through the fence, and sometimes, for higher fees, Johann would lead them into the outer section of the enclosure for photographs. He saw it as education and conservation, mixed with business. To staff, Johann was competent but stubborn. He had a habit of trusting his instincts over protocols. Employees described him as meticulous with animal care, yet dismissive of warnings when it came to Simba. The lion was full-grown, nearly 500 pounds, and though raised in captivity, he retained the instincts of a wild predator. Still, Johann insisted Simba recognized him as the one constant presence, often entering the cage to clean or adjust the feeding structure alone. Adult male lions, especially those kept in captivity, exhibit erratic behavior when stressed. Their territorial instincts can surge unpredictably, especially after storms, when scents shift and sound travels differently. A single swipe of a paw can break bone. Their bite, over 650 pounds per square inch, is built to crush windpipes. Even with long-term handlers, moments of agitation can become fatal within seconds. According to pieced-together evidence and reports, Simba had been restless since the thunderstorm. The overnight lightning had sent him pacing and roaring through the night, rubbing his mane against the fence. Caretaker Peter LaRue noticed the behavior early and told Johann that morning to postpone cleaning until the animal calmed down. Johann brushed it off, saying the lion got anxious if ignored. Around 9 a.m., Johann took a broom and bucket toward the enclosure, while a visiting maintenance worker tested a new camera. There are moments I can't shake, images that return to me in the quiet hours. One such moment is from a casually recorded video. It shows a man named Jan approaching a lion enclosure. Inside, a lion named Simba, initially still, suddenly shifted, ears forward, body low, the picture of predatory focus. I've seen the video. Jan entered the enclosure, closing the inner gate, but leaving the outer one ajar. He started sweeping, speaking softly, seemingly unfazed. The person filming was fascinated by Jan's calmness, but then everything changed so fast. Simba began circling, his tail twitching. The video, and later interviews, revealed how quickly the lion's behavior escalated. He lowered his head, crouched, and lunged. The impact threw Jan to the ground, his broom flying. Simba's jaws clamped onto his shoulder, driving him down. Jan yelled, trying to push the lion away, but Simba shifted his grip, his teeth sinking into the back of Jan's neck. The sound of Simba's growls drowned out Jan's cries. Simba dragged Jan toward the shade, his claws tearing through his clothes and skin. Jan tried to roll over, kicking at the lion, but Simba's weight crushed his ribs. Another employee threw a bucket of water over the fence, but it only startled Simba for a moment. Yan's voice faded into short, gasping sounds. Simba lunged again, biting into his throat. It was swift and final. The lion's jaws stayed locked as Yan's body went limp. The growls faded into rhythmic breathing. One worker ran to sound the alarm. The other, still holding the camera, didn't move for nearly 30 seconds. Rangers arrived quickly, tranquilizer rifles ready. They found Simba standing over Yan's body. When the lion turned toward them, they fired 2 darts. Simba collapsed beside Yan. Yan's body was pulled free, his clothing torn and soaked with blood. The autopsy revealed crushing trauma to the neck and severe blood loss. Bite movements confirmed a single, sustained attack, consistent with defensive predation rather than aggression. The lodge was closed. Simba was euthanized, and his remains were sent for examination. Officials deemed the incident preventable, citing complacency and poor safety protocols. The property was sold, and the lion enclosure was sealed. It was October 6, 2013, in Mobile, Alabama. Not far away, behind a modest brick house on the Reeves property, stood 2 large, weathered cages. Inside were 2 chimpanzees. Within an hour, their routine would shatter into something violent and irreversible. Linda Reeves, 58, was a retired lab technician. Her colleagues remembered her discipline, precision, and a fascination with animals that bordered on obsession. She'd poured her savings into building an enclosure for 2 young chimpanzees she'd adopted, Buddy and Rosie, raising them since infancy. To Linda, they were family. She fed them cereal, dressed them in children's clothes, and sometimes let them watch television through the screen door. Her brother, Tom, visited weekly, worried about the chimps, who had grown quickly. Buddy now weighed over 130 pounds, and Rosie was nearing 100. Chimpanzees are incredibly strong, with a bite force capable of shattering bone. In the wild, they can be extremely aggressive, especially when competing for dominance. Captivity often amplifies these instincts. Tom had seen them rattle the cage doors when upset, and warned Linda repeatedly that they were no longer controllable. But it was routine. Feed, clean, groom, and talk to them like children. That Sunday morning, the routine would unravel. Linda carried a bowl of fruit into the enclosure. Tom watched from the porch. Buddy screeched as she entered, bouncing on his knuckles while Rosie clung to the bars. Linda told them to sit, setting the fruit on a rock. Buddy reached before she gave the signal, grabbing her wrist. She pulled back, scolding him sharply. The sound he made next, a deep, chesty pan-hoot, was different. Tom saw the shift immediately. Buddy lunged, knocking Linda backward. The fruit scattered. Rosie screamed, leaping down from the bars. Linda's voice rose in panicked bursts as Buddy pinned her by the chest, tearing at her hair. Tom dropped his mug and fumbled for his phone to dial 911. Buddy's hands were red, gripping a handful of Linda's scalp. The screams turned ragged as Buddy's teeth closed around her face. He bit through her cheek. Rosie joined, latching onto Linda's arm. Tom ran to the fence, striking it with a shovel while shouting for help. Buddy's head jerked up, eyes wide and black, before he went back to tearing. The fence rattled under the blows, but neither chimp reacted for long. I still can't shake the image from my mind. A patch of concrete, stained faintly dark, where a hose just couldn't wash everything away. It's a stark reminder that some bonds, built over years, can turn fatal in seconds. It was April 17th, 2015, a bright, warm afternoon just outside Chicago. Yellow school buses were pulling into the parking lot of a small private animal park. A roadside zoo, really, with fading paint and rust eating away at its old fences. Families with strollers mingled with school groups, their teachers trying to keep order as students pointed at parrots, goats, and monkeys in cramped pens. Near the middle of the park was the chimpanzee exhibit. A low chain-link railing and a shallow algae-lined moat were all that separated the visitors from the enclos. A hand-painted sign warned, "No climbing or leaning on fence." Inside, 2 adult males and a younger female lived among wooden climbing structures and a patch of worn grass. The walls were streaked with moisture, and the enclos looked outdated, a far cry from the modern habitats you see in larger, accredited zoos. One of those visitors was Matthew Collins, a 12-year-old 6th grader on a spring field trip. His mother worked night shifts as a nurse, and his father operated a forklift. They didn't travel much, but Matthew loved animals and never missed a chance to see them up close. He was bright but impulsive, his teachers said, the kind of boy who liked to climb anything taller than himself. He carried a second-hand digital camera, saved for by mowing lawns. His plan was simple: get the best photos of the chimps out of anyone in his class. By mid-afternoon, the group gathered near the chimp enclos. The air smelled of hay, damp earth, and the sour trace of leftover feed. The students crowded against the metal barrier, talking and laughing as their teacher gave instructions. Matthew, standing near the back, raised his camera, but couldn't get a clear view. Wanting a better angle, he stepped onto the lower rail for balance. A few classmates noticed and motioned for him to stop, but he ignored them, focused on his shot. The railing was slick with humidity, and the ledge beneath his shoe gave slightly. As he leaned forward to center the chimps in the frame, his foot slipped. A few students gasped as his arms windmilled. Then he dropped over the rail and into the pit below. He landed hard on his right side, rolling onto his stomach with a groan. From above, teachers screamed his name. A few kids started crying. For a moment, the enclos was silent, except for the soft panting of the chimps. Then one of the males, an older, broad-shouldered chimp named Bo, stood upright, bristling with tension. He gave a sharp hoot, slapped the dirt, and started toward the boy. The younger male followed, puffing air through his lips in short bursts. Visitors who were close enough later said the sounds were chilling. Deep hoots that rose in pitch, the rhythmic drumming of palms on the ground. The 2 chimps stopped about 10 feet away, heads tilted, eyes fixed on the strange figure that had dropped into their space. Bo took 2 quick steps forward and grabbed a fistful of Matthew's shirt. Matthew screamed and tried to crawl backward, but the chimp's grip was like iron. Bo's first strike wasn't a feeding bite. It was a dominance blow, a sharp smack to the side of the head that knocked the boy sideways. Then came the bite, a hard, fast clamp on the arm near the wrist. The smaller male joined in from the other side, pulling at the boy's sleeve and striking his shoulder. The sounds of hitting and tearing mixed with hoots and panicked screams from above. A zookeeper stationed near a nearby enclos heard the commotions and ran toward the enclos, shouting for the crowd to move back. He grabbed a hose from the maintenance shed and sprayed into the pit, the high-press stream breaking the chimp's focus for seconds at a time. Bo let go, slapped the ground, and charged forward again, stopping inches from the water spray. The younger male backed away, pacing in circles while pant-hooting. For nearly half a minute, the two chimps alternated between lunging and retreating as keepers threw fruit and banged metal poles against the barrier to draw them off. Eventually, Bo released his grip on the torn fabric of Matthew's shirt and retreated. There's a kind of primal horror in the thought of it. A chimpanzee, something so like us, turning with sudden, unstoppable violence. I remember reading about a case some years ago that still haunts me. It happened on June 11th, 2014, in Stamford, Connecticut, a place that sounds so ordinary, so safe. But on that day, behind the trimmed lawns and neat front porches, a woman named Belinda Holmes was about to face an attack that would shock her entire community. Belinda was 57, a part-time insurance worker. But what really set her apart was her unusual companion, a male chimpanzee named Charlie. She'd had him since he was an infant, completely ignoring state laws that forbade owning such animals. She dressed him in clothes, fed him at the table, drove him around. Friends said she was devoted to him, convinced she could control him like any other pet. For years, Charlie was a local curiosity. Children would stare at him through the windows. Neighbors watched Belinda walk him on a leash. She treated him like family, always defending him against any concern. But there were warning signs, weren't there always? Charlie had grown huge. By age 12, he weighed over 120 pounds. Belinda struggled to restrain him when he got upset, but she insisted he was gentle, just misunderstood. The house itself told the story. Furniture scratched and damaged from his climbing, the air thick with animal musk. Charlie had free roam, from the kitchen to the living room to the small backyard. On that warm June day, with the windows open, Charlie grew restless. Belinda tried to calm him with fruit and snacks, but years of living in a human home couldn't erase his instincts. When chimpanzees are stressed or frustrated, their aggression can surface suddenly, with a violence that no amount of familiarity can prevent. There had been earlier incidents. Months before, a neighbor had called animal control after Charlie escaped into the yard, chasing cars and pounding on a vehicle before Belinda got him back inside. State officials reminded her that owning him was illegal, but she ignored the fines. Friends noticed Charlie getting irritable around strangers, but Belinda just kept saying he was harmless. On that afternoon, his agitation was clear. He banged on the table, knocked over a chair, showed his teeth. Belinda moved closer to grab his arm, and in seconds it began. He lunged, slamming Belinda backward onto the couch. His hands gripped her shoulders, and he bit her face with terrible force. Neighbors heard the sound through the open windows, furniture crashing, Belinda screaming. He bit again, tearing into her hands as she tried to protect herself. Blood pooled on the carpet as the assault continued with relentless strength. Belinda tried to crawl away, but Charlie dragged her back by her clothes. He hit her with his fists, then bit into her forearm, breaking the bone. Her screams brought neighbors running. One man tried the door, but stopped when he looked through the window. Charlie was hunched over Belinda, his face and arms covered in blood. The neighbours backed away and called 911, their voices shaking as they described what was happening. Police arrived within minutes. Walking toward the front door, they heard the chimp screeching and Belinda crying. Through the glass, they saw Charlie attacking, tearing at her scalp and face. There were no cages, no barriers, nothing to separate the animal from the victim. When Charlie turned toward the window and pounded against it with bloodied hands, the officers knew they had to act. They fired multiple shots, the sound echoing through the quiet street. Charlie collapsed in the living room, on the blood-stained carpet. Officers rushed inside and pulled Belinda out from under his body. She was barely awake, her face destroyed, her hands mangled. Paramedics worked quickly, but the damage was severe. She was airlifted to a trauma centre with critical facial injuries, severe trauma to both hands requiring amputation, and massive blood loss. Afterward, investigators documented the scene. Furniture was flipped over, walls were splattered with blood, and Charlie lay where he had fallen. Belinda's phone was found on the kitchen counter, smeared with blood. The last call she tried to make to 911 was never completed. Neighbours gathered outside. Just a few years earlier, something similar had happened. At an animal park, a man named Matthew was badly injured by chimpanzees after a barrier failed. I still remember reading about Belinda, the woman who survived a chimpanzee attack, but was forever changed. The screams, witnesses said, would stay with them forever. It sparked a national debate, and Connecticut eventually banned private chimpanzee ownership. What happened to Belinda wasn't an isolated incident. I recall another case, this one from May 28, 2017. It was Memorial Day weekend, and families had gathered for a barbecue along the Colorado River, just outside Austin, Texas. It was a quiet scene, children playing, adults unpacking food. But one guest had brought something most people only see behind glass, a chimpanzee. The victim was Daniel Ortiz, a 36-year-old high school track coach. He was known for his kindness, always bringing extra water and sunscreen. He'd just finished a run and stopped by the barbecue after a friend's text. He was curious. Daniel liked animals. He volunteered at a shelter, helping calm anxious dogs. He kept his distance from the chimp, who wore a harness. The owner was showing it off, handing out fruit. Daniel wanted a photo, something to show his students. He moved a little closer, angling for a clear shot. The chimp was restless, pacing, sniffing, reaching. A faint musk mingled with the smell of charcoal. Adult male chimpanzees, I've learned, are not suited for crowds. Dominance, in their world, is enforced with violence. Human handling can't erase those instincts. Crowds, unfamiliar faces, food, it can all trigger them. A city ordinance banned exotic animals within Austin, but this picnic spot was just outside city limits. The handler, it turned out, lacked proper permits. A couple stepped back when the chimp bared its teeth at a toddler. The owner shortened the leash, but kept feeding it fruit. A runner warned that it looked risky. Daniel nodded, adjusted his stance, waiting for a steady shot. The tension was building. Children clustered too close, then were pulled back. The chimp snatched a strawberry and grunted, eyes fixed on moving hands. The owner tugged the leash. Daniel stepped forward, maybe 2 feet, to avoid someone's shoulder in his photo. The chimp wheeled around. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the lunge. The harness yanked tight, but the chimp's hand closed on Daniel's wrist. His phone flew away. The first bite tore into his forearm. He stumbled backward, trying to pull free. The chimp's grip held. A second bite tore into his hand. Screams erupted. The chimp dragged Daniel down, pinning him. Daniel tried to roll, but the chimp climbed onto his torso, hammering his shoulder. The leash tangled, slackened. The chimp shifted higher, seized Daniel's head, and bit his cheek. Blood stained the grass. Attempts to intervene failed. A man kicked at the chimp, but the chimp knocked him off balance. Another tried to use a folding chair. The chimp ducked and bit Daniel's face again. The sounds were awful. Wet impacts, ragged breathing, shrieks from the animal, grunts from Daniel. A woman dragged children away as the owner crawled toward the leash. The attack slowed when the owner looped the leash under the chimp's chest. The chimp released, then lunged again, tearing at Daniel's face and arms before finally weakening. Daniel's movements faded. Another bite broke a bone in his wrist. Bystanders threw bottles, tried to shield him with a trash can lid. Nothing worked. Emergency calls went out, but the rural location delayed help. By the time deputies arrived, the shouting had stopped. The chimp sat trembling near the overturned table, leash twisted tight. Daniel lay motionless on the trampled grass. The chimp was sedated and taken away. By dusk, only tire tracks and torn paper plates remained. The river kept moving, carrying away the sounds. I've always found the line between human and animal to be more porous than we often admit. It's a line that blurs most tragically when we force animals into our world, into our spaces. I remember reading once about a chimpanzee attack that occurred on a California film set. The details haunted me for days. It was a September morning in Los Angeles back in 2018. What was meant to be a simple animal demonstration for a daytime talk show turned into something horrific. The clearing was filled with light, hours earlier. The chimp, a 13-year-old male named Mike, had been brought in for the shoot. Kevin Harris, an experienced exotic animal trainer, had worked with Mike since he was a baby. At 125 pounds, Mike was fully mature, strong, intelligent, and, most importantly, unpredictable when stressed. Kevin often said that Mike knew the rhythm of production life, that he could stay calm under noise and movement. But those familiar with chimps knew the truth. Adulthood changes everything. Males that once tolerated crowds often grew volatile as their dominance instincts sharpened. The set was modest, just a sofa, coffee table, and painted backdrop under hot studio lamps. Mike sat on a low stool beside Kevin, wearing only a light collar and leash, shifting constantly, tugging at the strap, and scanning the unfamiliar faces. Before cameras rolled, the animal safety coordinator suggested delaying the segment. Mike was showing stress behaviors, pacing, baring teeth, and tugging sharply on the lead. But the director insisted they proceed. The schedule was tight, and the sunlight from the windows was already shifting. Kevin re-assed everyone it was fine, offering Mike small pieces of banana to settle him. As recording began, the room brightened under the lamps. The host smiled for the opening shot, reading lines about wildlife awareness. Kevin guided Mike closer, cueing him to wave, a trick they'd rehearsed countless times. For a few seconds, everything worked. Then the boom microphone dipped low, casting a shadow that swept across Mike's face. His posture changed instantly. A low pant hoot echoed off the walls. Kevin turned toward him, voice low, reaching out to calm him. That brief touch broke the balance. The chimp lunged sideways. The leash snapped tight as Kevin fell backward. Mike's hands came down in rapid strikes, fists hammering Kevin's chest. The room filled with noise, shouts, hoots, the crash of equipment. Kevin tried to shield his face, but Mike's jaws locked onto his arm just below the elbow, tearing muscle and tendons. Blood sprayed across the carpet as Kevin twisted, trying to free himself. The chimp released and struck again. Another bite to the shoulder, another blow with his fists. Crew members screamed for security. One man swung a tripod to break the attack, but Mike dodged, gripping Kevin's shirt and dragging him toward the wall. The chimp's shrieks grew higher, rhythmic and mechanical, each sound matched to a strike or bite. Kevin's movements slowed. A crew member threw a fire extinguisher. The spray clouded the air. Mike released for a moment, then turned toward the noise, baring teeth streaked with red. Security burst in, one man carrying another extinguisher. The first blast of powder hit Mike square in the chest. He staggered briefly before collapsing beside the toppled couch. Animal control officers arrived within minutes and tranquilized Mike on sight. Kevin survived, but barely. Surgeons later documented dozens of puncture wounds, a shattered forearm, and severe facial injuries. He lost part of his arm and most of the muscle tissue on one side of his face. The production shut down indefinitely. The footage was never aired. In the aftermath, investigators cited lapses in protocol and disregard for the safety consultant's warning. For Kevin, the lesson came at an unbearable cost, one he would spend the rest of his life recovering from. I remember reading another unrelated story about a wildlife photographer in Uganda. It was October 9th, 2019, along the Kampala-Fortale Highway in western Uganda. I've always felt a strange pull toward the edges of things, the places where one world bleeds into another. But sometimes those liminal spaces hold unexpected dangers. I remember reading about a photographer named Martin, driven by the pursuit of unique images, who ventured a little too close to such a boundary in Uganda. He was hoping to photograph chimpanzees near the roadside clearings against the backdrop of the mountain road. He had experience photographing gorillas and monkeys before, but that drive for something truly special sometimes led him toward risk. He parked his car near a bend, camera slung over his shoulder, and started walking along the shoulder of the road. A local motorbike rider shouted something at him, gesturing toward the trees, but Martin just waved back, perhaps thinking the danger was more from speeding trucks than from the animals themselves. The highway cut through green ridges, with vegetation pressing close. Traffic would pass in bursts, followed by long stretches of silence broken only by the sounds of the forest. On one side, a red dirt slope rose nearly 20 feet, draped with vines. On the other, trees leaned over a drop into dense undergrowth. Chimpanzees sometimes appeared along these edges, able to climb across the embankments or descend into the ditches. Their habitat was shrinking, and the edge of the asphalt had become another boundary they patrolled. When startled or challenged, aggression was often their first response. Rangers at the visitor centre often warned tourists to stay inside their vehicles when driving those forest roads. Truck drivers had reported seeing chimps near bends where fruit trees grew close to the highway. Locals avoided walking alone there, especially in the morning when the animals were most active. Martin had been told as much at his lodge the night before, but he dismissed it, reasoning that he had worked safely around gorillas under stricter conditions. Then, just a few minutes into his walk, he saw movement on the slope above. A large male chimpanzee emerged from the vines, pausing at the edge. Behind him, two smaller chimps lingered in the plants. Martin raised his camera, crouching low for a clear shot. A truck roared past, startling the animals. The younger chimps retreated, but the male stood his ground, hooting sharply. Martin kept clicking, zooming in. He even stepped forward into the lane, unaware that the chimp had begun to climb down toward him. The descent took only seconds. The chimp dropped onto the asphalt with a heavy thud and closed the gap on all fours. Martin lowered his camera just as the animal charged, dark arms swinging with sudden speed. The impact knocked him backward into the gravel, his camera skidding away. The chimp seized his left arm and dragged him toward the edge of the road. Martin tried to brace himself, but the strength difference was overwhelming. The first bite tore into his forearm, ripping skin and muscle. A passing motorbike braked, the rider shouting as he watched. Martin screamed and kicked, but the chimp straddled his chest and struck his head with its fists. Another bite tore into his shoulder. Blood pooled quickly on the gravel, running into the ditch. The younger chimps appeared briefly from the tree line, hooting and circling before retreating again. The male remained fixed on Martin, pulling at his clothes and biting again, this time at his ear and jaw. Witnesses tried to intervene. The motorbike rider threw stones, but the chimp barely flinched. A truck slowed, horn blaring, startling the animal just long enough for Martin to roll weakly onto his side. The chimp dragged him back and sank its teeth into his thigh, shaking violently. The sounds were raw. Martin's strained breathing, the chimp's screeches, the crunch of gravel as the struggle shifted back and forth. The assault lasted only a few minutes, but it felt far longer to the witnesses before another vehicle stopped and locals rushed forward, shouting and waving sticks. The chimp released its grip and retreated toward the slope, disappearing into the vines with blood on its face and hands. Martin lay motionless on the roadside, his clothes torn and soaked. Drivers flagged down a passing truck, and he was lifted onto the flatbed using a blanket. With no ambulance nearby, locals tried to keep press on his wounds. As the truck sped toward Fortel, he lost consciousness within minutes. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, he had no pulse. Doctors at the hospital confirmed he was dead on arrival. His camera bag held memory cards with his last images. The forest edge, the red dirt slope, and one blurred frame of the chimp stepping from the vines.